Food and Drug Administration by Bodie, Tyler, and Jenna. So, talking enabling legislation, the Food and Drug Act was signed into action by President Theodore Roosevelt. The law basically said you couldn't add hazardous materials to food or conceal problems with food. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 was established during a time when food and drugs were starting to be a mass product. Manufacturers were taking advantage of the lack of regulations and were putting in dangerous ingredients. Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, helped make the push for the creation of the Food and Drugs Act. As time went on, the FDA gained more responsibilities, and the FDA regulates 1 trillion worth of products each year. Their lawmaking comes based off of what they're actually allowed to do.
The purpose of FDA, Food and Drug Administration is responsible for protecting the public health by ensuring the safety and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. The FDA also has responsibility for regulating the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of tobacco products to protect the public health and to reduce tobacco use of minors. FDA is responsible for advancing the public health by helping speed innovations that make medical products more effective, safer, and more affordable, and by helping the public get the accurate science-based information they need to use medical products and foods to maintain and improve their health. FDA also plays a significant role in the nation's counterterrorism capability. FDA fulfills this responsibility by ensuring the security of the food supply and by fostering the development of medical products to respond to deliberate and natural emerging public health threats. The functions of the FDA include collecting and testing the quality and efficacy of health products. They will also collect data on adverse effects of possible harmful products. They'll recommend standards in the storage and distribution and manufacture of drugs. They'll conduct research on the food and drug products. And lastly, they'll perform inspections on various manufacturing facilities.
The FDA is empowered to prevent untested products from going to market, take legal action to halt sale of harmful products, seize products and prosecute those who violate the law, and carry out inspections of facilities, which basically means facilities must meet published standards.
The composition of the FDA includes the head of the FDA is the U.S. Commissioner of Food and Drugs, and the commissioner is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Currently, the commissioner is Robert Califf, who has also served previously. Under the commissioner, there are 4 directorates overseeing the core functions of the agency. These core functions include medical products and tobacco, food and veterinary medicine, global regulatory operations and policy, and lastly, operations. Overall, the FDA employs around 14,000 people. And here's just a breakdown of how the directorates are, what in their responsibilities. Who work at the FDA? The FDA employs a wide variety of fields and disciplines. The major ones are biologists, chemists, nurses, pharmacists, vets, engineers, and many more. So, a local current event that recently happened in my hometown related to the FDA was one of our local juice maker was recently charged with 12 federal counts tied to unsanitary conditions and tainted products. So basically, what was happening was a few years back, before they sold this processing place, the FDA made a surprise inspection, and they were checking to see if the conditions were sanitary, if everything was good to go. And it turned out that the person who owned this facility was storing juice concentrate in buildings that were not federally under the FDA standards, and they tried to hide it. And they even tried to mark it off with caution tape, trying to make sure that the FDA inspectors wouldn't go in. But eventually, the FDA inspectors they figured out what was going on, and they got in there,
and they were started documenting, and that the picture above is one of the barrels that they found, and it was covered in mold, and they were seeing like rats running on it. So this they took that to court, and now this lady is finally being charged with 12 counts of contaminating food services or food, and some of this juice was even being sent to the children at schools and things like that. So the FDA sometimes seems like it's always affecting these big companies, big pharma, and things like that, but in fact, it can have a major impact on food services just in your local community. Next, we're going to talk about a few of the current issues for the FDA. Right now, one of the biggest ones is they are filing a lawsuit against Juul. They're trying in August or June. They told Juul to stop the production of their e-cigarette devices because they didn't know that they didn't have the sufficient evidence regarding the toxicology profile of the products. Recently, though, that was put on hold as the FDA is trying to do a more thorough investigation before they finally actually ban it for good. So right now, the Juul products can still be bought and sold. Another current issue for the FDA is the COVID vaccines. We've heard a lot about that in the last few years as the operation like Warp Speed, they're trying to get those COVID vaccines out as fast as possible. Now, because of that, the FDA is under a lot of scrutiny. So recently, the group of doctors have sued the FDA, and they want to see all the data that they collected that went into approving these COVID vaccines. And the FDA is not very compliant right now, and they're telling them that they need like 75 years before they can provide all the data necessary, and the judges are not satisfied with that, and they're telling them they need to have more like a couple of years for them to get that information out to the public, and it's casting a dark shadow on the FDA, and it seems a little sketchy what was going on. And the next thing is we also heard a lot about the baby formula shortages, and the FDA is not completely responsible for that, but they didn't help the situation. They performed an inspection of one of the major facilities that produces baby formulas, and because of that, they found that it wasn't up to standard. So they decided that they were just going to shut it down. And this was already happening at the same time that the shortages were already happening. So they just kind of made the situation worse for them. Next, talk about monkeypox. There's another thing we've heard about in the news, and they're talking about they need to find a vaccine for that. So the FDA has a major role to play in that because in order for vaccines to go out to the public, they need to have FDA approval. Next, there's the effects of the SCOTUS ruling on the EPA. So recently, the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA cannot just make laws up as they see fit regarding like emissions and things like that. And this will have an effect on the federal FDA as well because it'll mean that the FDA cannot just take doesn't have the free will to just make laws and is under more scrutiny now in making sure what it can do. Lastly, we have the opioid epidemic, and people are casting blame on the FDA because some of these drugs that made it to market should not have been there in the first place. And they think that the regulations that the FDA put them up against were not strong enough. And as a result, we have a huge problem because of it.
One case that happened in March 21, 2000 that involved the FDA was the FDA versus Brown and Williamson Tobacco Corp. So back in 1996, the FDA asserted its authority under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which we talked about earlier. Beyond that, they tried to regulate tobacco and issued regulations governing tobacco's promotion, labeling, accessibility to minors. Several tobacco companies sued the FDA and challenged these regulations, arguing that since they did not market their tobacco with claims of therapeutic benefit, the FDA had no jurisdiction to regulate it, which, yeah, in class three we talked about jurisdiction and, yeah, like you guys didn't have the jurisdiction to regulate it, so it wasn't really in their favor in this court case. The district court sided with the FDA, but the United States, the Supreme Court, ruled against it with a 5 to 4
So, as you can see, the FDA has a major role to play in the world, and without them, we'd have a lot less safe food products and things like that.